So we'll go ahead and get started, and hopefully everyone else can filter in. Thank you all for joining us this evening and kind of bearing with us as we go from in-person to Zoom, and then kind of back and forth on that. We're really hoping to be in person. Obviously, just kind of the state of where we're at is not conducive to us meeting in person. Hopefully in March or some other meeting we can do so. But for now, we're on Zoom and it's nice to see everyone's faces. So let's go ahead and, oh, I didn't mention, but I'm Rachel Kiefer and I'm the new watershed coordinator. For those who haven't met yet, a couple of your faces look familiar, so that's really good. I'm trying to get more into Alpine County and get involved. It's been really great starting. And everyone should have our agenda. And Kimra, do you mind sharing that just so people can also take a look at it?
Do you want me to share the agenda or just the slide?
Wait, there was a slide with the agenda, I think. Mm-hmm. Do you mind sharing that? Perfect. And this was set out in the email too. So if you're having a little trouble reading it or want to keep along during the meeting, it should be in that email that I sent earlier today. And just a couple of things. So Kimra currently is running IT. So if you're having any issues or need to reach out, go ahead and reach out to her. And that's awg.kimra@gmail.com, or you can direct message her in the chat. After the introductions, I'm going to go ahead and take over with IT. And you can either reach me in direct messages or at awg.rachel@gmail.com. And hopefully this runs really smoothly and no one has any issues, but feel free to reach out at any point. Okay. And then just a couple tips for using Zoom. First, if you could please rename to your name, or if there's two people on one Zoom call, that really helps us in keeping track of who is participating. And we can take notes and then also give feedback if people have comments or questions during the meeting. And you can redo that based off, you go to your square, if there's 3 dots in the corner, right corner, and you can rename if you click on that. Second, during our presentations, please use the chat feature to ask a question or make a comment, because there is a slotted time after each of those presentations for comments and questions. And then at the very end of the meeting, we'll open it up again. And then during discussions, you can also use the chat feature or raise your hand. The raise your hand is under reactions. It's on the bottom strip. And then if you have your Zoom window shrunk or you lost it, you can go ahead and on your tab bar, there should be the Zoom icon and you can go ahead and click that. And then that should be all our tips and tricks. Obviously, we're still kind of new to hosting a meeting. This is my first hosting time. So if anything comes up, please bear with us and we will handle it with as much patience and grace as we can. So I think that's all I have for that part. So Kimra, you can either go to the first slide or stop sharing. Perfect. Okay. And then, so we're gonna do introductions first. And this being my first meeting with AWG, I was gonna do a longer introduction, and so is Sierra, our lovely AmeriCorps member. And then we'll go into group introductions. All right. Hello, everyone again. So my name is Rachel Kiefer. I'm the watershed coordinator with Alpine Watershed Group. And I started with AWG at the end of November. And so this is, again, my first meeting. My most recent work was with the Tahoe RCD and with our land management seasonal crew. So we did a bit of Caldor fire recovery, mostly a lot of fence building on that end. So a little bit of land management. And then before that, I served 4 different AmeriCorps terms. So just AmeriCorps to the bone here throughout the Western United States. And I served on a trail crew with Nevada Conservation Corps, and then with Arizona Conservation Corps, with an outdoor recreation department at Yuma, which was in the Bureau of Land Management office, so down in Arizona. I also have served with the Santa Monica Resource Conservation District through the Watershed Stewards Program to protect and restore salmonid habitat, specifically rainbow trout or steelhead salmon. So those both hold really dear places in my heart. And then finally, before finishing off my AmeriCorps service terms, I served with Truckee Meadows Parks Foundation, at the Reservoir Nature Study Area as a lead technician in wetland restoration. So if you've been up to Reno, I've heard they are taking an old golf course and rehabilitating it to its native wetland habitat. And then previous to that, I went to school in Maryland, so Goucher College, where I did my final capstone project on plastic microfibers in tap water and looking at specifically municipal versus well sourcing. And then I also studied abroad in the Galapagos, which was an amazing experience. And I focused on the relationship between protecting the land and economic well-being on those living there. And this was eye-opening and exploring the relationship between humans and the environment, and the knowledge that we are very much a part of the environment and part of the sustainability equation. And I was drawn to AWG because of their strive to connect the people with the surrounding environment, ensure access to the knowledge of the land we live on, and how to stay informed and involved. And with that, thanks for listening to them. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sierra to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sierra. I am originally from Flagstaff, Arizona. I graduated just this past semester with a degree in environmental science, an emphasis in environmental management, and a minor in biology. I have done previously 2 study abroad trips, one to New Zealand to learn about permaculture, sustainable agriculture, and Maori culture, as well as whale studying marine biology. I've also done an internship with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I am the AmeriCorps now, working as the monitoring and outreach specialist at Alpine Watershed Group and Sierra Nevada Alliance. I am very excited to be working here and working in Alpine County for the next year, and it's great to meet all of you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sierra. And we'll have time at the end if anyone else wants to talk about anything else on that part with our introductions. But we're going to go ahead into kind of the group introductions. So we're hoping everyone can introduce themselves with their name and the affiliation. So I'm going to go ahead and call on 3 people at a time, just so we're not going back and forth staring at who's going next. So Carl, Beverly, and David, if you guys could go in that order, please.
Good evening. My name's Carl Rushmeyer. I'm a resident over in Round Hill, Nevada at Lake Tahoe. I've been a river monitor and working with the advisory group for the last 4 years. And most recently, I guess I'm your junior or newest board member for the Alpine Watershed Group. But I'm a registered environmental and civil engineer, and I have my master's degree in environmental engineering from UC Davis.
Beverly, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself.
I thought I had unmuted me. Beverly Griffith Williams. I'm a retired teacher. Basically, my daughter, Birgit Whittegren, is very involved in water quality. She works a lot with the Truckee River, with the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection. And having come here recently because of granddaughter and daughter who live here and have for several years, I found the beauty of Alpine County. And then I started researching and found that you have 5 beautiful rivers that flow from you. So of course, last year, as was everyone, I was devastated by fires that happened. And I have off and on been a member of this group and decided that I needed to keep my membership. And when I can, I will work with groups to see what we can do to help our environment. But it's one of the most beautiful places in the world, and I really care about it.
David Griffith, Alpine Biomass Collaborative, and I'll be brief and that'll be it.
Okay, thank you. Bill, Lauren, and Mary, go ahead.
I'm Bill Young. I live in Markley Village. I'm a river monitor with Watershed Group. I'm retired chemical engineer and we've lived up here in Markley Village for 2.5 years full time, but we've had a house up here for almost 30 years. My primary involvement right now, or primary task is working with the water company and doing work trying to primarily at the intake and restoration work.
Thank you, Phil. Lauren, did you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, my name is Lauren Roach. I'm a civil engineer and I work for Hanford ARC. We're a restoration contractor, a native restoration contractor. And I have been involved in all the Hope Valley restoration projects. So the 2015 bank stabilization, the 2016 big project that was upstream there on Blue Lakes Road. And then most recently, the 2020 project of the inset floodplain, and then the 2015 bank stabilization project. I was born and raised in Carson City. Hope Valley has been my backyard my entire life. So I haven't been to one of these in a while, but I'm glad that you have them going on again, and would like to be involved.
Hi, I'm Mary Young. I'm married to Bill Young, and I'm also president of the board of directors for the Markleeville Water Company.
Thank you. And January, Brenda, and then Ron.
Hi, I'm January Riddle, and I'm with the Alpine County Board of Supervisors. And Sierra, I'm a lumberjack too. NAU.
Go Jacks.
Hi, I'm Brenda Hunt. I'm the Watershed Program Manager with the Carson Water Subconservancy District.
Hi, I'm Ron Hames, Alpine County Board of Supervisors.
All right, and JT, Becky, and then Mark and Pat, please.
Hey, good evening, everybody. JT Chevalier, Community and Economic Development Director and Public Information Officer for Alpine County.
Good evening, everyone. Becky DeForest with the Alpine County Chamber of Commerce.
We're off mute. Hi-ho, everyone. Mark Schwartz. This is my wife, Pat. Most of you we've met, but for those that don't know us and we haven't met before, we're transplants from the Bay Area here 5 years, live in Markley Village, and we are active in various things here in town. My wife and I, along with Mary Rawson, do the Markleeville Enhancement Club. So we're the ones that put the barrels and the poinsettias and, you know, do cleanups in town and stuff like that. And I'm also on the water company board along with Mary, and dabble in the chamber board as well as the Trails Association. And I own a little cycling gig here in town, California Alp Cycling. During the day, I'm a business development director for a software company based in Southern California, but I'm blessed to be able to work from home. My wife is almost retired.
Almost retired.
Great to be here.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. And Judy, Marcia, and Roderick, if you could name an affiliation, please. And then Judy, I can't see your screen, but if you are talking, you're muted. And if not, we can come back. Okay, we will come back. Marcia, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, it's kind of dark. I just got off work, so I'm sitting in my car. My name is Marcia Berry, and my husband and I, Keith, are river monitors, and I'm just happy to be here. Thanks for neat to meet everyone too over Skype.
All right, and then Roderick.
I'm Roger Gordon, firefighter with CCC up in Myers, and happy to be here.
Thanks. And then Kimra, if you want to go ahead and end us off, unless I forgot anyone.
I'm sorry, what was that, Rachel?
If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll get down with the introduction.
Hi, I'm Kimra McAfee, who's been taking phone calls and getting last minute registrants here. And I'm Executive Director for Alpine Watershed Group. Welcome and thank you so much for all being here tonight. Like Rachel said, I'm very disappointed we aren't in person, but I'm glad we're being safe.
All right, perfect. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. A little bit, I think I've interacted with most of you through email, but it's just not the same. It's easier to put a face to a name and really get to know you guys. So thank you. And with that, we're going to go ahead and start our first presentation. So Sierra is going to present on Musser and Jarvis.
All right, can everyone see everything okay?
Looks good, Sierra.
Great. So, hi, everybody. My name is Sierra Riker, and I'm the AmeriCorps member working as the Monitoring and Outreach Specialist at Alpine Watershed Group, as I said earlier. Today, I'd like to give you an overview of the Musser and Jarvis Watershed Restoration Weekend outcomes. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Musser and Jarvis, this watershed supplies 70% of Markleeville's water and was impacted by the Tamarack fire in July of last year. The Musser and Jarvis drainage flows into Markleeville Creek, which flows into the East Fork Carson River. The drainage is also part of the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest, and Markleeville Water Company has a permit for their water supply operations. Because of the fire, the banks have become unstable and the hillsides are eroding into the stream, therefore clogging Markleeville Water Company's intake infrastructure. This restoration project, spearheaded by Markleeville Water Company President Mary Young and her husband Bill Young, with permission from the U.S. Forest Service, was meant to stabilize the hillsides to prevent further erosion. The first part of the project was to spread the seeds of 6 native grass species in the flatter areas near the banks of Musser and Jarvis Creek. These grasses serve to slow surface runoff, allowing water to infiltrate into the ground and nutrients, pollutants, and sediment to settle. These nutrients and pollutants can then be taken up by plants, get metabolized by microbes, get absorbed into soil particles or decay, thereby preventing them from flowing into the stream, which improves surface water quality. The roots from the grasses will also help stabilize the soil, preventing further erosion. The 2 other key project tasks focused around slowing runoff and storing sediment on the hillsides. One of these tasks was installing wattles, which are 25-foot-long tubes filled with straw. You often see these on steep slopes along highways. Wattles are barriers that are staked into the ground to block the passage of runoff. Some of the wattles that were installed can be seen in the photo on the left. These were specifically placed at the foot of the hill for the most effectiveness. The other task was fulfilled by CAL FIRE California Conservation Corps, who felled and chinked trees. Chinking is where you pack the soil upslope from a felled tree against the wood to create a barrier, which prevents water from moving down the hill as easily and reduces erosion. You can see a chinked tree in the photo on the right. Because this is U.S. Forest Service land, tree felling can only be done by a U.S. Forest Service certified tree feller. Markleeville Water Company was able to bring in CAL FIRE California Conservation Corps, or CCC crews, to do this. These crews generally help to build fire breaks, work on fuel reduction projects, and respond to wildfires. We had 2 crews of 15. The first, pictured bottom left, worked on Friday and Saturday, and the second, pictured bottom right, worked on Sunday. The first crew spent a half a day on Friday filling 15 trees and installing the wattles. Saturday was the first day of volunteer work. We had 30 volunteers attend to rake, spread seed, and chink trees. There were a total of 175 volunteer hours. The CCC crew felled 50 to 60 trees and helped to chink about half of them. On the bottom left, you can see the Saturday volunteer crew, and on the right, the volunteers are working on seeding. This process involved digging the soil up above the ash, spreading the seeds, and raking the seeds into the soil. If pine needles are present in the area, volunteers cleared them before digging up the soil and replaced a light covering once the seeds were raked in. On Sunday, we had a total of 19 volunteers, pictured bottom left, and 104 volunteer hours. This day was also spent seeding and chinking trees, this time in some of the more heavy burn areas like those you see on the right, where the ash layer could be as thick as 3 inches. CCC felled another 50 to 60 trees and helped to chink like the previous days. Over this weekend, volunteers and CCC crews installed 900 feet of wattles, seeded 7 to 8 acres, and felled and chinked 115 to 135 trees. Our community contributed a total of 284 hours in volunteer work. Overall, the project improved 15 acres around the Musser and Jarvis watershed. Mary and Bill have continued to put effort into this area even after the restoration weekend concluded. On behalf of Markleeville Water Company, Mary has submitted funding requests for future projects and is waiting to hear back. Alpine Watershed Group is also drafting a monitoring protocol for future monitoring efforts in the area to see what impact the project made. This plan will be reviewed by Markleeville Water Company and the U.S. Forest Service. We plan to focus on photo point monitoring and will be exploring the potential for vegetation monitoring. We have already gathered 2 sets of data, photos before the project, pictured left, and after the project, pictured right. We will continue to take photos from the same 24 locations in the future in hopes of capturing rates of erosion in locations that receive different treatments, as well as overall plant growth. This will tell us how effective the project was at preventing hillside erosion and restoring the area after the Tamarack fire. I would like to take the time to thank Alpine Chamber of Commerce, who funded the seed and the wattles for the project through the Tamarack Fire GoFundMe account, Deputy District Ranger Brian Hansen of the U.S. Forest Service, who obtained approval for this project, Andy Lovell and Alpine Trails Association, who donated their time and tools, Debbie Waldier and Friends of Hope Valley, who volunteered and brought in people from places like Carson City and Sacramento to help, Kimra McAfee and Alpine Watershed Group, who helped to lead the volunteers, Jed Gaines of CAL FIRE, who organized and led the CCC efforts, and Richard Burchell of Markley Village, who helped to organize the work and brought in CAL FIRE CCC. Lastly, none of this would have been possible without Mary and Bill's tireless efforts. They obtained the funding, planned the project, and were even working on the site several days before the volunteers were there. Thank you both for all of your hard work and letting us participate in such an awesome project. I will now hand this over to Mary Young to discuss future updates for the area.
Thanks, Sierra. And I'd really like to thank Alpine Watershed Group for sponsoring that project because the water company is not in position to do a community project like that. And you guys were, and it's been wonderful. So far, just kind of with our watershed, our biggest problem has been at the intake. And so I just wanted to kind of show you what's going on out there. This is our intake. It's super simple. It's just a dam in the creek. Over here, there's a riser. Under here, there's a perforated pipe and a gravel pack. So this is how the intake looks in normal operation. Next slide, please. And this is what the intake looked like after the first storm, after the fire. You can see over here where the vertical riser is, it was completely covered with debris, and even back behind here, gravel and rock had filled in the whole area. Next slide, please. So this is our intake now in the current operation. Obviously, we cleaned all that out. We'd had other situations where we had to clean it out, but we have it operating fairly well now. You can see there's just a lot of gravel and sand at the bottom of the creek. And we have it kind of set up now where that bypasses our standpipe, and we keep clear water around the standpipe. So it's working fairly well, but it takes a lot of maintenance. Next slide, please. So this is our water system. It's a schematic. It's basically every water system, but we have an intake. We have a pipe that goes to our treatment plant where we do clarification, filtration, disinfect the water, and we send it up to the tank. So what's kind of happening because of the fire? We have to do a lot of inspection and maintenance at the intake, a lot more than we did before. We have to flush this raw water line at least 3 times a week to keep the sand and sediment from building up in that pipeline. Here at the plant, the characteristics of the raw water can change from day to day or even from morning to night, depending on the runoff coming out of the burn area. So our operator, Buck McClellan, is just always working to tweak and modify plant operations to produce the best possible water. Sometimes we do get conditions where the runoff is so dirty with ash or with sediment that we can't treat it. And not shown here, we have 2 groundwater wells, and the water from those wells goes straight to the disinfection process and then into the storage into our system here. So I just want to emphasize that despite the condition of the watershed, we're always providing safe and clean drinking water that meets all the state requirements. Next slide, please. So what Markleeville Water Company is trying to be proactive to apply for funding to improve the water situation. And we're kind of fighting the fight on 3 levels. One is restoration of the watershed, as Sierra described in this presentation, but anything we can do to speed up the natural revegetation of the watershed is going to help us out. We're also trying to reduce erosion in the burned condition. So things like the tree felling and chinking that we were talking about. And then we're also looking at just straight engineering solutions at the intake, doing things to reduce the amount of grit and sand in the water. So this is the list of things we've applied for. The Alpine County has sponsored us for the state and private forestry grant. They've also sponsored us with the NRCS grant. The state and private forestry grant is probably the biggest chunk of money that we've requested, and that money would go for all kind of 3 of those things. It would be for intake improvements, access improvements, and then we're looking at a larger watershed restoration where we could possibly do the entire 157 acres of the watershed that is outside the wilderness boundary. The NRCS program, one of the good things about that program is that they provide technical assistance. So they're going to be able to provide assistance during the application phase. And then the last one there, the DWR grant would be for a 3rd well, and having a 3rd well would certainly increase the amount of water available when the water in the watershed is not treatable. So next slide, please.
And with that, I would like to open it up to any questions that anyone has.
We did have one in the chat. So Brenda asked, how long will you be monitoring this restoration? It would be awesome to know which seeds take the best, which ones grow and create deep roots, etc. Amazing work.
So we don't really have a timeline on it as of right now, but we will be continuing this at least for the next few years as the seeds establish. We are looking into vegetation monitoring specifically. We're going to try and be able to identify grass species, although we know that's something that's very difficult and might be out of our wheelhouse. But we really do want to try and capture which species do better than others, as well as what other species of grasses and plants are coming up that we didn't plant there, and just have that available as a future restoration resource.
And if I could just add something to that, Brenda, as you know, it's often really hard to find funding for monitoring. As I'll talk about later, I feel like Watershed Group's been pretty successful in getting some post-fire restoration and monitoring funding. But what we also have that's just incredible here is Mary and Bill. And Bill and Mary are out there checking on things. And Bill and Sierra together established the photo monitoring points. So I think I can safely say that we've got monitors on the ground to continue that monitoring for a a long time, for the indefinite future, even if we don't have funding for staff time. So that's just fantastic.
Thanks, Kimra. And then we had another question just popped up from Becky. And she says, Mary mentioned flushing the supply 3 times a day. How often does this need to happen prior to the fire? Have professional fees for inspections, et cetera, increased due to increased monitoring, or is this done in-house?
Hi, this is Mary. I will say we didn't really do the full-on flushing of the pipe prior to the fire. We generally just always had some water running through it at all times, but now we specifically open up that valve all the way 3 times a week. So that's a new process. And our existing operators do that. The question about professional fees, not particularly professional fees, but we've had to have contractors out there 3 times since the fire to clean out the intake. I haven't gotten all the bills yet, but I believe we probably spent $10,000 on just contractors and excavating equipment. Right, but since the last clean out, we have been able to maintain it.
And Mary, have you seen any correlation with the storm events? Because I know that usually is what floods the sediment down.
Well, yeah, we've had the 2 big rain events since the fire. And the interesting thing was the first one brought all that debris down. That was a really big storm. But then the second storm seemed to bring more sediment down. And that was the one that plugged our intake pipe and was actually more complicated to clean out than the first one. The snow has actually been good for us, though.
So to add on that, I did a measurement over in Sprat Creek because if you look closely at the creek, you can just watch the sand and DG as it flows down the creek, even in low flow situations. And I did a measurement on Sprat Creek, and we were getting about a cubic yard of sand and DG per week, which may not sound like a lot, but that's enough to fill up our intake on a weekly basis. And that's at low flow. Increase the flow and you increase the sediment flow.
Becky, you got your hand raised, so if you want to ask, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious, when spring comes, do you see another work event like this needing to take place, or what you anticipate for the spring?
So we likely probably will try to avoid doing another work event because we do want to allow time for these seeds to take root and grow. And the less people we have out there, the better that'll be. Hopefully with the tree felling and chinking, as well as the wattles, that'll also help with the spring rains to keep a lot of those hillsides back. But I'll still have to kind of play it by ear.
Great, thank you.
That said, I know there was some leftover seed. So Bill and Mary, did you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, there is some leftover seed, and we were thinking, I was kind of thinking of possibly having the CCC out to place some of that seed in I don't know if you remember that last day we were there on Sunday, but we kind of had to rush through the end. So I think we could go on the other side of the creek where we didn't able to work and spread some more seed there.
After the weekend work, Mary and I have been back and have used some of the extra seed in higher up plateaus further away from the stream bed. And then there are a lot, as Mary pointed out, there's a lot of areas that are still unseeded that we could easily use that and not disturb the existing seeded areas. However, we did work up almost to the wilderness boundary which is where we have to stop. We can't do any work in the wilderness. So we are restricted as to what we can do in the total watershed.
And there was another comment from Brenda regarding the seed, I believe. And also, she said also could use it if there are places that don't grow well. And then we got the seed, I believe it was said, we got it from Comstock Seed with Ed. And Sierra has reached out to Ed and been in collaboration and figuring out how to track the seeds and potentially which seeds will work best. So we're really interested in seeing kind of which ones do work the best and which ones could be used again.
Any other questions for Sierra, Mary, or Bill? Okay, well, if something occurs to you, please put it into the chat. I am going to now share my screen. So I wanted to give an overview of the watershed group's plans for 2022. And whenever I give a presentation, I usually start off with kind of what makes AWG different for a watershed group. I know most of you have already heard this before, but we are unique in that we don't just cover a single watershed, but we align with county boundaries. So our purview is actually the headwaters only of 5 different watersheds. So on the east slope, we have the Carson and the Truckee, and on the west slope, we have the Southwick American, the McCullumney, and the Stanislaus. But we are very similar to other watershed groups in that our program areas are monitoring, restoration, and community outreach and education. And since the Tamarack fire, we've been really working on getting resources to support our work for post-fire restoration and monitoring. But as we plan for 2022, it's a bit of a struggle to balance everything we usually do, all of our in-process projects and programs, with post-fire restoration. And then we don't want to lose momentum on other issues we've been making progress on, like sustainable recreation. And we also need to get back to things that have been really long-term issues, like the East Fort Carson River hot springs and the water quality impacts there. So I'm going to give an overview of our ongoing projects and programs, and then I'm going to talk about some of those funding sources for post-fire restoration. And then I'd like to hear from all of you on watershed priorities. But what I didn't do was totally thank Sierra and Bill and Mary for all the work they put into not only the workday, but the presentation. So thank you all. That just kind of, I get nervous, and so I segued right into what I was going to say. For our ongoing projects, oh, there's a question, Rachel.
No, that was me clapping my hands. Sorry.
Oh,
very good presentation. Sorry about that.
So for our ongoing projects, this year, American Rivers is going to be moving to construction on the Faith Valley Meadow Restoration Project. This was supposed to go to construction this year, or last year, 2021, but the fire interfered. And so that's American Rivers as the lead, and they're going to be having a contractor install a grade control structure and also some beaver dam analogs in Faith Valley. And Alpine Watershed Group's role in that is to help with monitoring and with community outreach. The other big project that Lauren mentioned at the beginning is the most recent Hope Valley project that went to construction in 2020. And so Alpine Watershed Group will be continuing to monitor that project. And that project also had a budget for adaptive management. So as the monitoring identifies needs, then we will implement them. For instance, last Creek Day, we led volunteers in installing some sod plugs in kind of the bare areas in the bench that weren't filling in as quickly with grass. Third project, Markleeville Creek Restoration Project. You've all been hearing about this for decades. We are finally getting close to having funding for the floodplain restoration project, which includes removing the flood wall and revegetating the area. This coming year, the Caltrans will be completing the Markleeville Bridge replacement project. And then also in the coming year, Markleeville Public Utility District is working on their pump station relocation. And part of their project will be upgrading the line, the sewer line that goes under the creek. So they are no longer planning to replace that line, but they will be re-sleeving it. And they will be taking the 2 manholes that are in the floodplain on the county administration side of the creek. They will be taking those out of use, and then they'll be elevating the manhole on the other side of the creek so that when it floods in this area, we don't have the same risks for sewer overflow. And then hopefully in 2023, we will finally have the floodplain restoration project. There's also a new partnership this year. National Forest Foundation, NFF, is doing their first partnership with the Humboldt-Toiyabe National Forest. And some of you have been hearing for several years that the Humboldt-Toiyabe has a West Fork Carson project, and this has to do with fuels management. So NFF got funding to do the fuels management in some select areas around Hope Valley. That's Forest Service land. Our role in that project is also to help with aspen monitoring so that we can see how the aspen responds to the conifers that are removed. And then, also community outreach. And then there's our ongoing programs. We will continue to have our river monitoring program. We are actually looking for some new river monitoring volunteers. A couple of our key volunteers have moved out of the area. So if you have time to donate, please contact Rachel. We hope to have an in-person training later this spring. And then similarly, the regional board has a new post-fire monitoring plan, so they are doing increased monitoring, and we hope to assist them with that monitoring program. There's our harmful algal bloom monitoring program. This would be the 4th year that AWG is helping the Regional Water Quality Control Board to collect samples. We don't yet have any funding for our staff time, and the regional board doesn't yet have funding approved for the lab analyses. But Alpine Watershed Group is very committed to collecting those samples, provided that the lab analyses funding comes in. There's the West Fork Carson Vision Project. This is another project that you've all been hearing about for several years. You might recall in 2020 and 2021, we had a series of forums that our watershed group meeting hosted in collaboration with the regional board. We covered restoration, roads, and recreation, and then Cindy Wise with the regional board retired. So her successor, Danny McClure, is now in place, and we will be having the 4th and final forum as our next watershed group meeting. That's Tuesday, March 8th at 5:30, and that will be on ranching. And then finally, our long time ongoing programs are our annual work days. Creek Day has been going on for over 2 decades. We're hoping to have that on September 17th. We do hope to hold an Earth Day work day, date to be determined, scope of work to be determined. And then as many times a year as we can, we lead Adopt a Highway cleanups on AWG's stretch, which is from the Markleeville campground up to the Highway 89 cutoff to Monitor Pass. So the good news is, we've been pretty successful in getting funding for Tamarack fire restoration. As the fire was still going on, I started seeking grant opportunities because I knew that the watershed group wanted to be at the table. And we're very grateful that the Strong Foundation for Environmental Values and Trout Unlimited Sagebrush chapter have granted us some funding. A little bit of alphabet soup here. The Sierra Nevada Conservancy a couple of years ago started the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, or RFFCP. And for the past 2 years, AWG has been involved in the RFFCP in the East Side region. And so Alpine County is lumped in with Mono County and Inyo County for the East Slope, for the Carson River watershed. And it's been a little frustrating that Alpine County's needs don't necessarily always align with Mono and Inyo's needs. We obviously have very limited Alpine County staff capacity. Your watershed group is very, very small. So AWG approached Sierra Nevada Conservancy and said, we really feel like we need a little more capacity in Alpine County. And what came of that is AWG has been specifically invited to apply for this next round of RFF-CP early action funding. So there's the Eastside subregion, and we still have that coordinator who's working with Alpine, Mono, and Inyo. And then there's some funding for Alpine Watershed Group to work with our community. And this is capacity building. This is trying to be able to gear up to garner more resources for forest health, fire restoration, fuels management, and resilience. And it includes Alpine Watershed Group being able to take a more active role as a grant writing partner. Now, the other great news is some of you know that Alpine County recently got a fire coordinator grant, and that's from the California Fire Safe Councils. So our hope is that AWG can work with that fire coordinator and get some grant writing over the next 2 and 3 years so that both fire restoration and the ongoing forest health fuels management resources can come to Alpine County. There's 2 more grants. There's an finally, sorry, I just got messages in my head that recording stopped and recording in progress. Finally, there's the state and private forestry grant that Mary talked about, and Alpine County was kind enough to include Alpine Watershed Group to help with watershed restoration and revegetation projects. And this is the one, if it comes through, it would probably allow Alpine Watershed Group to hire a 3rd full-time staff member. And that's really critical to us being able to keep doing all of our normal projects and programs, and then also really ramp up the post-fire restoration. And the point I really want to make about the post-fire restoration is that our goal is to make sure that the various agencies and watershed community members all work together so that the restoration that's needed short-term and long-term actually happens, so that we don't just move on to the next priority for the Forest Service or for BLM, and then we don't get the restoration done that needs to be done. And we also want to play a more active role in making sure the ongoing fuels management for forest health and watershed health happens. And right now it's really hard because there's so many players, and it's really hard to know what work is going to happen and what's going to be neglected. But we as the Watershed Group are very interested in being the best possible partner and support we can be for the community. And so that really leads me to your questions and you all kind of helping to tell the Watershed Group what you see as the other priorities. Are there ones I've missed or things that we really need to be focusing on?
And there were some conversations in the chat specifically about kind of access to wilderness and whether that was a priority. I believe it's been answered, and the short answer is it's extremely hard to work in the wilderness, which is good because it protects that wilderness. It is what keeps it the wilderness, but then it makes it really hard for us to work there. So there are any other questions, we can talk about it, but I think it was answered in the chat.
And I'm looking at the chat now. I know that wilderness has come up with Bill and Mary because there was such severe burn in some areas, and the hope that maybe some work could be done at the same time, that balance of protecting the wilderness. Any questions, comments? Yeah, Carl? You have to unmute.
Yeah, I just have a question in general about potential funding, and I was just wondering the impact of the BIB, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, and the monies that are coming in. I'm on the board for financing SRF program for the state of Nevada. I'm less familiar with the California program, but I know the funding in Nevada is going to double or triple, especially on the Clean Water Act side. And we're expanding our IUP over there for a lot of restoration and forestry type of work, and watershed work would be eligible. We also have a pretty generous principal forgiveness program. So I'm just wondering if anybody's been looking at the impacts of the BIB and potential funding.
And I have not heard anything. Can anyone in California speak to this? I don't know whether, because we have 3 supervisors, any of them can speak to this if they do know anything.
Hi, this is Mary. I can speak to it a little bit. The Markleeville Water Company does have an SRF project. And this is a pre-fire project that we have to replace all our water lines and also do some improvements at the treatment plant. But I do know that they have gotten additional funding, and possibly because of the fire too, we were eligible for additional dollars on that existing project.
Yeah, I just understand there may be a lot of opportunity, and I'm just wondering, obviously Alpine County is a small community. I'm not sure if you qualified as disadvantaged or not, but are you getting principal forgiveness on these funds, or are they actual SRF loans? Just
yes.
curious.
Oh yeah, no, they are. We get principal forgiveness. Alpine County or our area is a severely disadvantaged category.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Anyone else?
There was a question January asked in the chat. She says, I'm interested in beavers as restoration species. And do we have anything going on about beavers in our area?
So that's part of the monitoring that Alpine Watershed Group has been doing with American Rivers, I believe twice a year for the past several years, both in Faith Valley and in Hope Valley. And that's, like I mentioned, part of the Faith Valley Restoration Project is to install some beaver dam analogs in that area. There's definitely beaver activity in Faith Valley, and I think in parts of Hope Valley. Mo was much more versed since she was actually out on that monitoring. Brenda, do you have anything to comment? Or actually Judy might also have more information on beaver activity.
Sorry, my door just got opened, so it got very loud all of a sudden out in my little space. My knowledge right now is very similar to yours, that there will be monitoring being done in relation to the American Rivers project in Faith Valley. I think that they are looking at, how many beavers are there versus, doing the analogs. I think that they're interested to see, will the analogs be actually taken over by beavers as well. So I think there's going to be some interesting, things happening with that. But as for any other particular restoration projects right now to use beavers, I don't think that's happening. And I also, January, I think you've had conversations at Carson Water Subconservancy District's board as well, that there are controversies with beavers as well. And beavers can cause a lot of issues with restoration projects. And that has occurred in the lower watershed where, we actually have to they're putting barriers around the trees because we're losing all of our cottonwoods, especially our large cottonwoods. So there's the balance issue is a really important thing. And I know our board is very concerned about the population balance and making sure that we're not kind of tipping the balance, I think.
And I think that the last I knew for American Rivers project is they were going to use a phased approach. And so they were going to start with a few beaver dam analogs and go from there. And so January, I'm hopeful that hopefully the monitoring progress of that project will teach us something, and then will enable us, if appropriate, to use more of those tools in our restoration toolkit in the future once we see how things work out in Faith Valley.
Great. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
Me too. I know you and I have read some of the same materials, and I'd like to see Beaver as our partners in restoration.
Me too.
Just wanted to shout out the book Eager, if even any of you read that. That's one of the top ones.
I had another question, Kimra, just in relation to the vision, the West Fork Vision Project. I'm not sure how far along that's going to get in the next year, but just in relation to if that actually comes to fruition and it becomes a, you know, I guess a completed document, or they get projects on the books, just maybe helping with looking at adapting that into the Carson River Adaptive Stewardship Plan, so that we can have access, or you guys, Alpine County in particular, can have access to the 319 funds with that information. So I think that's a really important aspect of that vision project, that if it comes to fruition, that gives you access to 319 monies, which you haven't had from the California side to date. And then also, you know, all the other work you guys are doing, and, you know, just kind of keeping that in the back of your head is, how do we keep track of all of that, so that when we do the stewardship plan update, that we have that information. So, you know, maybe we can talk about that, you know, offline, but just, you know, tracking those projects so that we can really, you know, when we come back to do that plan, we have all that information really easily available.
And my understanding with the vision plan is, and Rachel, cut in here if I'm getting these dates off, but I seem to recall that they were supposed to have the complete draft of the vision plan done by fall of 2022. So they are on full speed ahead. From the watershed group's perspective, the most challenging thing has been identifying what are those projects that we want, that are the highest priority projects, and the projects we want to put in for once we can have 319 funding. And then just so everyone knows, Mo Loden, who moved on, is now with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and part of her job is helping groups with that 319 funding. So, you know, Mo's already kind of coming back to me saying, you know, when you're ready, the 319 funding is here. And I heard that this last round, they had a record low throughout the state in applying for the 319 funding. So it does seem like, yeah, there's funding out there, but we all need to figure out what are the projects to be tackled next that are directly related to improving water quality. So, and the unfortunate thing, as Brenda knows well, is because the vision plan is just for the West Fork Carson River, it doesn't help us with the East Fork Carson Hot Springs, which have long been one of the biggest areas that we all wanted to see some improvement, some restrooms, some management of the dispersed camping. So that's a challenge too, that it's not going to open up that funding for that area.
But that when this West Fork one is done, it's possible that, you know, with all of us discussing it with them, that we could ask them that be their next vision project for this area, because you know, they already didn't approve the Carson River Stewardship Plan, the portion that was in Alpine County, you know, kind of because of this vision, and we've all been talking to them about the East Fork. So hopefully that's something that can be on the plate in the near future. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else have any priorities you want to put forward, or topics you'd like to see presented on at future watershed group meetings after we get through the final forum in March for ranching and the Vision Project? So just as a preview, what you probably will be seeing is if our Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program funding comes through for the capacity building. One of the topics that Sierra Nevada Conservancy has brought up is whether there's any sense in restarting the Alpine Resource Conservation District. And my understanding is Alpine's Resource Conservation District ceased to exist around the time that the watershed group started 20 years ago. And Rachel and I and our board have just started to have discussions and tried to figure out history. But offline after this meeting, if you have any early history or personal experience with how resource conservation districts have evolved and have come to be more about non-agricultural, non-ranching, and more fuels management, forest management sorts of groups. We're not looking to start another organization in Alpine County if there's no reason for it, but we do want to have the capacity so that we can get projects done here. Any way we can support Alpine County and all work together with all of the partners and stakeholders to get things done and improve water quality. So that will probably be a May sort of discussion as we move forward with capacity building. Okay, well, I'm not gonna keep us around on Zoom if we don't need to be. I did wanna announce some upcoming events. Tomorrow night, we are just so honored and so thrilled that Carson Water Subconservancy District is awarding the Andy Aldax Award to Alpine Watershed Group. And that speaks to 20 years of community members and then early staff and early watershed coordinators doing all of the work that Alpine Watershed Group has been doing. So we're really, really happy to be accepting that tomorrow night. And Brenda, as far as I know, it's still also happening in person, but there is a Zoom option. So if you go to our website or go to the most recent newsletter, there's information on how to go to that meeting. I would also like to plug the next Alpine Biomass Collaborative meeting, which is Tuesday, February 1st at 6 p.m. And David has lined up a presentation by Michelle Capoletta with the U.S. Forest Service, and that's going to be on post-fire management of vegetation and fuels. So it's kind of been back and forth between Alpine Biomass Collaborative having just really, really timely presentations on post-fire, and then us trying to continue this discussion. So please join the ABC meeting if you can. And then again, our next meeting will be on Tuesday, March 8th, and we'll see if we can meet in person or if we're Zooming again to have a ranching forum. So thank you all for Zooming in. I know there's lots of other places you could be tonight. Oh, Ron, question. You have to unmute.
Yep, had to get to that. Just want to remind everybody that there is a new attempt at a Zoom Bear Talk on the 27th at 5:30. JT will be handling that Zoom from the county. Want to make sure everybody gets that, the 27th at 5:30.
Thank you, Ron. I had not heard about that yet, and I've been looking forward to that.
Yeah, we should be getting a press release out about that tomorrow with Zoom information attached to it. So I'll circulate that. And if I don't have your email, feel free to, I'll leave my email in the chat and I'll make sure to add you to the distribution list.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else, any announcements? Okay, well, if you're not a river monitor and you want to be, you can hang up and email Rachel. But I know we have a lot of river monitors already on the line. Thank you all so much. Stay healthy and take good care.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.